should have known something was wrong when I saw Harold's face. The drive up to Cape Disappointment had been rough enough. 3 hours of winding coastal highway with October rain hammering my windshield and the Pacific throwing itself against the cliffs below. But when I pulled into the gravel lot beside the lighthouse, Harold Brennan was standing there waiting for me like he'd been carved from the same gray stone as the tower behind him. He had a clipboard in one hand and the kind of expression you see on doctors before they give you bad news. "Marcus Thompson?" he called over the wind. "That's me." Harold walked over to my truck as I climbed out. Salt spray hit my face immediately, sharp and cold. The lighthouse stood maybe 50 yards away, white tower rising into the storm clouds like a finger pointing at heaven, or warning it away. "You're late," Harold said. I checked my watch. 4:37. Traffic was... doesn't matter. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "We need to go over the rules before dark." The paper felt heavier than it should have when he handed it to me. Handwritten in careful block letters, like someone had taken their time making sure every word was clear. I read it twice. Cape Disappointment Lighthouse Night Shift Rules. 1. Do not answer the door between sunset and sunrise, no matter who knocks or what they say. 2. Never leave the lighthouse building during night hours, sunset to sunrise. 3. When maintaining the light mechanism, do not look out the windows. 4. If you encounter a man in a red coat, do not speak to him or acknowledge his presence. 5. If you hear footsteps from the upper levels when no one else should be there, leave the building immediately and call this number, 360-555-0847. Is this some kind of joke? I looked up at Harold. Like a hazing thing for new guys? His gray eyes didn't blink. Your life depends on following every single one of those rules. Do you understand me? My stomach clenched. Something in his voice made the joke theory die right there in my throat. I don't understand what? You don't need to understand. You need to follow the rules. Harold turned toward the lighthouse. Come on, I'll show you the equipment. The lighthouse door was solid oak, thick enough to stop a truck. Harold pulled out a ring of keys and unlocked 3 separate deadbolts before pushing it open. This gets locked at all times, he said, day or night, but especially at night. The main room was bigger than I'd expected, with stone walls and a spiral staircase winding up into darkness. Radio equipment sat on a wooden table next to a logbook and a thermos that smelled like coffee. Light mechanisms up top, Harold said, starting up the stairs. You'll need to check it every 2 hours. Oil the rotation gears at midnight and 4 a.m. Backup generators in the basement if the power goes out. We climbed past 2 more levels, storage rooms filled with supplies and spare parts. The stairs creaked under our feet, old wood that had probably been here since the lighthouse was built. The light room sat at the top like a glass crown. The lens was massive, maybe 6 feet across, with mirrors and prisms that caught what little daylight filtered through the storm clouds. It rotated slowly, throwing beams across the churning water below. Ships depend on this light, Harold said, especially in weather like this. You keep it running no matter what else happens. I nodded, watching the mechanism turn. What about Rule 3, not looking out the windows? Harold's jaw tightened. When you're up here working on the light, you focus on the equipment, nothing else. But what if I see? You don't see anything. His voice cut through the air like a blade. You do your job and you follow the rules. We went back downstairs. Harold showed me the generator controls, the supply closet, the radio frequencies for the Coast Guard. Emergency numbers were taped to the wall next to the radio. Questions? He asked. I had about 100, but something in Harold's face told me he wouldn't answer them anyway. How long have you been doing this job? I asked instead. 37 years. He picked up his clipboard. Lost 3 men in that time. All of them thought they knew better than the rules. The wind rattled the windows. Outside, I could see Harold's truck waiting in the gravel lot, engine still running. I'll be back at sunrise, he said, heading for the door. 6:43 a.m. exactly. Have the logbook ready." He unlocked the deadbolts and stepped outside. Then he turned back. "Marcus, those rules aren't suggestions. They're the only thing standing between you and whatever's out there in the dark." The door slammed shut. I heard his truck start up and pull away, gravel crunching under the tires until the sound faded into the storm. I stood alone in the main room, looking at the heavy oak door. I walked over and turned the first deadbolt, then the second, then the third. I tested the handle. Solid. I tested it again. The folded paper was still in my hand. I read Rule 1 again as the light outside the windows started to fade. Do not answer the door between sunset and sunrise, no matter who knocks or what they say. Sunset was maybe an hour away. My first shift was about to begin. I'd been working the lighthouse for a week when I started thinking Harold might be messing with me. The routine was simple enough. Check the light every 2 hours, oil the gears at midnight and 4 in the morning, keep the logbook updated. During the day, I'd read through the supply manifests and maintenance records Harold left behind. At night, I listened to the Coast Guard chatter on the radio and made my rounds. The isolation didn't bother me. Hell, after 3 years of sharing a studio apartment with 2 roommates in Seattle, the quiet felt like luxury. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin walls at 2 in the morning. I started to relax. Maybe that was the problem. By the 4th night, I was making jokes to myself about the rules. Don't look out the windows while maintaining the light. I figured Harold was just trying to keep me focused on the equipment. Don't acknowledge the man in red coat, probably some local drunk who wandered around the point sometimes. The rules started feeling like an elaborate prank. Something to spook the new guy. I should have known better. The storm hit on my 8th night. I heard it coming for hours before it reached the lighthouse. This low rumble rolling in from the ocean that made the windows vibrate in their frames. By 10:30, the wind was howling so hard I could barely hear the radio. I was up in the light room doing my midnight check when the real weather arrived. Rain hammered against the glass like someone throwing handfuls of gravel. The whole structure swayed just enough that I had to brace myself against the lens housing. The rotation mechanism was running a little rough, so I spent extra time with the oil can, working the gears until they moved smooth again. The light swept across the water every 30 seconds, cutting through sheets of rain and spray. I was tightening the last fitting when I heard it. 3 knocks on the front door. My blood went cold, not because of the sound itself, but because of what it meant. Nobody should be outside in this weather. Nobody could be outside in this weather. The storm was tearing apart everything it touched, and the only way to reach the lighthouse was a 1/4-mile walk down an exposed trail. The knocking came again. 3 deliberate raps, spaced exactly the same as before. I gripped the lens housing and forced myself to think. Rule 1. Do not answer the door between sunset and sunrise, no matter who knocks or what they say. The knocking stopped. I stood there in the light room, listening to the wind tear at the building. My hands were shaking, but I kept working on the gears, just kept oiling them over and over, because I needed something to do with my hands. The silence stretched out. No more knocking, just the storm. I waited, counted my heartbeats, 10, 20, 50. Nothing. When I finally headed back downstairs, relief flooded through me like cold water. Harold's warnings weren't some elaborate joke to mess with the new guy. They were keeping me alive. 2 nights later, I was up in the light room again, working the cleaning cloth across the lens surface. The salt spray had built up thick during the day, leaving streaks that cut the beam's reach in half. I'd been at it for maybe 20 minutes when I heard it. A voice, soft and low, drifting up from somewhere below. "Marcus." I stopped wiping and listened. The wind was steady tonight, not the howling storm from before, but enough to make the building creak. Maybe I'd imagined it. "Marcus, please." There it was again, a woman's voice, melodic and gentle, like someone singing my name instead of just saying it. I set down the cloth and moved toward the windows, then caught myself. Rule 3. Don't look out the windows when you're maintaining the light. But the voice wasn't coming from the windows. It was coming from below, from outside the front door. I know you're in there, Marcus. I can see the light moving. Every muscle in my body wanted to go downstairs and check. The voice sounded so real, so human, not like the mechanical knocking from 2 nights ago. This was someone who knew my name, someone who might actually need help. It's so cold out here, Marcus. Please, just open the door. I only need to get warm. I found myself taking a step toward the stairs before I stopped. Harold's rules. Rule 2 specifically. Never leave the lighthouse at night. And there was something else he'd said, something about things calling me outside. The voice came again, closer now, like whoever it was had moved right up to the door. Marcus, I've been walking for hours. I'm lost. Please help me. My hands were shaking. The voice was so convincing, so desperate. What if it really was someone in trouble? What if I was letting a person freeze to death because of Harold's paranoid rules? But then I remembered what Harold had said. If something calls you outside, it isn't real. I pressed my hands against my ears and squeezed my eyes shut. The voice kept coming, muffled now, but still audible. Marcus, why won't you help me? I just need warmth, just for a little while. The words seemed to seep through my fingers, sweet and pleading. I could picture her out there, young, maybe, lost and scared. My hands started to drop from my ears. No. I forced them back up and pressed harder. The voice continued for what felt like hours, sometimes pleading, sometimes crying, sometimes just calling my name over and over like a prayer. My arms ached from keeping my hands clamped over my ears, but I didn't move, didn't go downstairs, didn't even look toward the windows. Marcus, please, I'm so cold, so tired, just let me in. 20 minutes, maybe longer. The voice never stopped, never gave up, and through it all, I stayed put in the light room, hands over my ears, eyes fixed on the lens mechanism. Then, finally, silence. I waited another 10 minutes before I lowered my hands. Nothing but wind and the steady rotation of the light. I finished cleaning the lens with trembling fingers and made my way downstairs for the rest of my shift. When Harold's truck pulled up at 6:43, I was waiting by the door with the logbook ready. He unlocked the deadbolts and stepped inside, shaking rain off his jacket. Quiet night? He asked. There was a voice, I said. A woman. She knew my name. Harold nodded and set down his thermos. What did you do? Stayed inside, covered my ears, didn't look out the windows. Good. He took the logbook from my hands and flipped through the entries. Did you go outside to check on her? No. Look outside at all? No. Harold closed the logbook and looked at me for a long moment. Then he walked to the door and stepped outside. I followed him to the threshold but didn't cross it. He was crouched down, studying the mud around the entrance. The rain had been light overnight, just enough to keep the ground soft. Harold stood up and brushed off his hands. No footprints, he said. I stared at the empty mud. If someone had been standing out there calling to me for 20 minutes, there should have been marks, shoe prints, something. She sounded so real, I said. Harold walked back to the door and stopped next to me. They always do. That's how they get you to come outside. They? Whatever's out there in the dark. He looked at the empty ground again. You did right, Marcus. The rules kept you alive. I thought about the voice, how desperate it had sounded, how much I'd wanted to help. What would have happened if I'd opened the door? Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't know. None of the men who broke that rule ever came back to tell me. He stepped inside and I followed, pulling the door shut behind us. Harold locked all 3 deadbolts without being asked. The lighthouse draws them, he said, settling into the chair by the radio. Has for as long as I've been here. Maybe longer. They know people work in here alone, and they know how to sound like whatever will make you want to come outside. I sat down across from him, still shaky from the night. How do they know my name? Don't know that either, but they always know. Names, voices of people you care about, whatever works. Harold poured coffee from his thermos and offered me the cup. The important thing is you didn't fall for it. I took the coffee and let the warmth seep into my hands. The voice had been so convincing, so human. If Harold hadn't warned me, if I hadn't had the rules to hold on to, I would have opened that door without question. "Thank you," I said. Harold just nodded and opened the logbook to start his day shift notes. Outside, the morning light was growing stronger, pushing back the shadows that had hidden whatever had been calling my name. I'd been working the lighthouse for almost 3 weeks when the worst storm I'd ever seen rolled in from the Pacific. The wind had been building all afternoon, but by 10 o'clock that night, it was howling like something alive and angry. I was down in the main room, updating the logbook, when every light in the building went out at once. Complete darkness, the kind that makes you forget which way is up. The generator should have kicked in automatically. That's what Harold told me, but I stood there in the black for 10 seconds, then 20, and nothing happened. Outside, the storm kept screaming. Ships. There were ships out there in this weather, counting on our light to keep them off the rocks. I fumbled for the flashlight Harold kept by the radio and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, showing me the way to the basement stairs. My hands were shaking as I made my way down, the wooden steps creaking under my feet. The generator sat in the corner like a sleeping beast. I'd only seen Harold demonstrate it once, but I remembered the basics. Prime the fuel line, check the oil, pull the starter cord. Simple enough, except my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I set the flashlight on a shelf and got to work. The fuel line was fine, oil looked good. I grabbed the starter cord and gave it a hard pull. Nothing. Another pull. The engine coughed but didn't catch. "Come on," I said to the machine, "come on." On the fourth pull, something moved in the corner of my eye, something outside the small basement window that faced the ocean. I shouldn't have looked, I knew that. But when you're alone in the dark and something moves where nothing should be moving, your eyes just go there. The water was black as oil, but there was something in it. Something huge, maybe 100 feet down, moving through the waves like it owned them. At first I thought whale, but whales don't have tentacles. Whales don't have that many arms reaching out from what might have been a head the size of a school bus. It moved slow and deliberate, like it was swimming up from somewhere deep, somewhere that didn't have a bottom. I felt my eyes lock onto it. Couldn't look away, didn't want to look away. The thing was beautiful in a way that made my brain hurt. All those arms moving in perfect rhythm, and the head, if that's what it was, pulsing with its own light, soft and green and hypnotic. "Look at me," something whispered in my head. "Look closer." My feet moved toward the window without me telling them to. The flashlight beam wavered as my hand started to drift down. All I wanted was to get closer to the glass, to see more of whatever was moving out there in the deep water. The creature's arms spread wider and I could see patterns on them, symbols that seemed to shift and change as I watched. They meant something. They were trying to tell me something important. "Look at me." I was almost at the window when Harold's voice cut through the fog in my head. Not Harold himself, just his words from 3 weeks ago, spoken in this same basement. Rule 3. No looking out windows when you're maintaining the light. I jerked my eyes away from the glass and back to the generator. My whole body was shaking now, not just my hands. The pull to turn around was so strong it felt like someone had hooked fishing line to my eyeballs. "Don't look. Don't look. Fix the light." I yanked the starter cord so hard I thought I might break it. The engine turned over, coughed, and roared to life. The basement filled with mechanical noise and the smell of gasoline. Lights blazed on throughout the lighthouse. The beacon upstairs started its rotation, sending sweeps of brilliant white light across the water. The urge to look out the window faded like someone had flipped a switch in my brain. I waited another 30 seconds, counting my heartbeats, before I let myself glance toward the ocean. Waves crashed against the rocks below, white foam and dark water, nothing else. The storm was already starting to ease up, and in the distance I could see the running lights of a cargo ship making its way safely past the point. I was halfway through a section on lens calibration when the footsteps started, not from upstairs, from down in the main room. My head snapped up from the manual. I'd been sitting at the small table by the radio for the past hour, working through Harold's maintenance guides. The lighthouse was locked tight. I'd checked those deadbolts myself after Harold left that morning, but someone was walking around downstairs. I set the manual down slow and quiet, listening. The footsteps weren't hurried or searching. They moved with purpose, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. A tall man stood near the door when I looked over the railing. He wore a red wool coat that looked like it belonged in some old photograph, the kind of heavy thing sailors might have worn 100 years ago. A wide-brimmed hat sat low on his head, casting shadows that swallowed up most of his face. I couldn't make out his features, just darkness where his eyes should be. The door was still locked, all 3 deadbolts in place, same as I'd left them, but there he was. He held a wooden pipe in one hand, tapping it against his palm. Tap, 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 each sound sharp and clean, like someone knocking on hardwood. The rhythm never changed, never missed a beat. My whole body went cold. This was him, the man in the red coat. Rule 4 said not to acknowledge him, not to look directly at him, but I was already looking, already seeing him clear as day in the lamplight. I forced my eyes back down to the manual. The words swam on the page, meaningless black marks, while my brain screamed at me to do something. Run, hide, grab the radio, and call for help. But Harold's voice was louder than the panic. Don't acknowledge him. Don't look directly at him. The footsteps started moving again. Closer. I kept my eyes on the manual, reading the same sentence over and over about proper lens alignment while the man in the red coat walked across the stone floor below. His boots made solid sounds, real sounds, not like some ghost or vision, like a man. A real man who'd somehow gotten through 3 locked deadbolts without making a sound. The tapping got louder as he moved closer to the stairs. Tap, tap, tap. Sweat started beading on my forehead. My hands shook enough that I had to press them flat against the table to keep the pages from rustling. Every instinct I had was telling me to look up, to see where he was, to figure out if he was coming up the stairs, but I didn't. I stared at that manual like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I could feel him looking at me, not just looking, studying, like I was some kind of specimen under glass. The weight of his attention pressed down on my shoulders, made it hard to breathe. Minutes crawled by. The tapping never stopped, never changed rhythm. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat, and my neck ached from keeping my head down, but I didn't move. The man didn't speak, didn't try to get my attention, just stood there and watched me pretend to read while that wooden pipe kept hitting his palm. Tap, tap, tap. Time stretched out like taffy. Could have been 10 minutes or an hour. The only sounds were the tapping and the distant crash of waves against the rocks below. Then the footsteps moved away. Back across the stone floor, slow and deliberate. I heard the door open, no sound of locks turning, no scrape of deadbolts, just the creak of hinges and the whisper of wood against the frame. The door closed with a soft click. The tapping stopped. I was up in the light room doing my midnight check when I heard them. Soft footsteps, careful ones, coming from the room directly above me. I froze with the oil can halfway to the gear housing. The footsteps moved slow and deliberate across the floor, heel to toe, like someone trying not to make noise but failing. Back and forth they went, one wall to the other. That room was empty. I'd checked it myself 3 hours ago during my evening rounds. Nothing up there but dust and some old rope coiled in the corner. The pacing picked up, faster now, more urgent. Whatever was walking around up there had found its rhythm, back and forth, back and forth. The footsteps grew heavier with each pass, like whoever it was had stopped caring about being quiet. My hands started shaking, not from the cold. I set the oil can down and backed away from the lens. The footsteps were frantic now, urgent, like someone searching for something they couldn't find, or someone they couldn't reach. Harold's fifth rule hit me like a punch to the gut, the one I'd hoped I'd never have to use. If you hear unexplained footsteps from the upper levels, evacuate the building immediately and call 360-5555, Arrow 847. Do not return until sunrise. The pacing stopped. Complete silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then it started again, faster and more agitated than before. Whatever was up there knew I was listening. I didn't wait around to see what came next. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the stairs and ran, down the spiral steps, taking them two at a time. My keys jangled in my pocket as I hit the main room. The footsteps above followed my path, moving across the ceiling like they were tracking me. I fumbled with the deadbolts, first one, second one, third one. My fingers felt thick and clumsy. The footsteps stopped right above the door, waiting. The last bolt slid free and I yanked the door open. Cold air hit my face like a slap. I stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind me, not bothering with the locks. Rain soaked through my jacket before I'd taken 5 steps. The wind cut through my clothes like it had a personal grudge. October on the Washington coast doesn't mess around, and this storm was proving the point. I pressed my back against the lighthouse wall, trying to find some shelter from the worst of it. Water ran down my neck and into my boots. My jacket was good for light rain, maybe. This was like standing under a waterfall. I pulled out my phone to call Harold's emergency number, but the screen was already fogged with moisture. Dead. Should have grabbed the radio, but I wasn't going back inside, not with those footsteps still up there. The wind howled around the lighthouse like something alive and angry. I huddled against the stone wall, trying to make myself smaller. The cold bit through my jeans and found every gap in my jacket. 1 hour passed, maybe 2. Hard to tell when you're shivering too hard to think straight. My teeth chattered so loud I could hear them over the storm. My fingers went numb first, then my toes. The cold worked its way up my arms and legs like it was claiming territory. I knew the signs. Hypothermia doesn't ask permission. It just takes what it wants. But I wasn't going back inside. Whatever was walking around up there, pacing back and forth in that empty room, was worse than freezing to death in the rain. Had to be. The storm kept getting stronger. Rain turned to sleet, then back to rain. My body stopped shivering after a while, which I knew wasn't good. That's when hypothermia stops being a threat and starts being a promise. I slumped against the wall, feeling the cold settle into my bones. My thoughts moved like thick syrup, slow and sticky, but I stayed put. Whatever was in that room could pace all night. I'd rather die out here than find out what it wanted. My teeth wouldn't stop chattering, couldn't make them stop no matter how hard I clenched my jaw. The sound echoed off the stone wall behind me, mixing with the storm like some kind of broken percussion. Above my head, the footsteps kept going. Back and forth, back and forth. Same pattern, same rhythm. Like whoever was up there had been doing this for years and knew exactly where they wanted to go. The sleet hit my face like tiny needles. Rain had turned mean about an hour ago, coming down sideways now instead of straight. My jacket was soaked through. Might as well have been wearing paper. Then the footsteps changed, started moving faster, not pacing anymore, running. Full sprint from one side of that room to the other, then back again. Heavy boots hitting the floor so hard I could feel the vibrations through the stone wall against my back. I pressed myself tighter against the foundation, used the lighthouse like a shield between me and the worst of the wind. Didn't help much. Storm was coming from all directions now. My fingers went numb first, then my toes. That creeping cold you get when your body starts shutting down the parts it doesn't need to keep you alive. I'd read about hypothermia in some safety manual years back, knew the signs. Didn't matter, I wasn't going back in there. The running upstairs turned into stomping, like someone wearing heavy boots was trying to break through the floor. Boom, boom, boom. Right above where I'd been standing when I heard those first footsteps, it knew I was out here. Whatever was up there, it knew exactly where I was. Could probably smell me or hear my breathing or something worse. The stomping followed me when I shifted position, tracking me along the wall. Hours crawled by. Had to be hours. My watch was too dark to read, and my hands too numb to work the buttons anyway. But the sky stayed black as tar, so dawn was still a long way off. That's when I started seeing things. Shapes moving in the storm that shouldn't have been there. Tall figures walking between the trees at the edge of the clearing. A woman in white standing by the trail, just watching. Every time I blinked, they were somewhere else. Hallucinations. Had to be. Your brain does funny things when it gets cold enough. But they looked real, real as the rain hitting my face. I almost went inside then, almost said to hell with Harold's rules and whatever was stomping around upstairs, because freezing to death outside seemed a lot worse than facing whatever was in there, almost. But Harold's voice kept playing in my head, that dead serious look he'd given me when he handed over those rules, the way he'd said I'd end up like the other three if I didn't follow them exactly, so I stayed put. The stomping got worse. Sounded like someone taking a sledgehammer to the floor now. Boom, boom, boom. Fast and angry, like whatever was up there had figured out I wasn't coming back inside and didn't like it one bit. My vision started going fuzzy around the edges. Thoughts moving like thick mud. I'd stopped shivering for long stretches, which I knew wasn't good. That's when your body gives up trying to warm itself. The shapes in the storm got clearer. A man in a red coat standing at the tree line. A woman with long hair flowing in the wind. Children holding hands in a circle, spinning around and around. None of them were real, couldn't be real. But I could see their faces. Dawn had to be coming soon. Sky was still black, but it felt different, less heavy, like the night was finally starting to wear itself out. The stomping stopped, just like that, middle of what sounded like someone trying to kick a hole clean through the ceiling, and then nothing, only the storm making noise. I waited, counted to 60, then did it again, then again, still nothing. First pale light showed up over the ocean maybe 10 minutes later. Gray and weak, but real. Real enough that I could see the trees clearly, instead of just shapes moving in the dark. The hallucinations faded with the light. No more figures in the storm, no more woman in white, just rain and wind and me slumped against a stone wall, half dead from the cold. I waited another 10 minutes, made sure the sun was really coming up and not just some trick my frozen brain was playing on me. Then I tried to stand. My legs didn't want to work. Took 3 tries to get upright, and even then I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling over. Couldn't feel my feet at all, like walking on stumps. The front door was still unlocked. I'd left it that way when I ran out, too scared to waste time with the deadbolts. I pushed it open and stumbled inside. Everything looked exactly the same. Radio on the table. Logbook where I'd left it. Coffee thermos Harold had forgotten yesterday morning. I looked up at the ceiling. No cracks, no holes, no sign that someone had been trying to stomp their way through the floor for the last 6 hours. Like nothing had happened at all. I don't know how many people can say they've worked the same job for 6 months and felt like they aged 10 years. But that's what Cape Disappointment did to me. The knocking came back. Not every night, but enough. Always during the worst storms when the wind hit the lighthouse so hard I thought the whole thing might tip over. 3 deliberate knocks, same spacing, same rhythm. I'd be up in the light room checking the gears, and there it was. Someone at the front door in weather that would kill a person in minutes. I stopped going to look, stopped wondering who it might be, just kept my hands on whatever I was doing and waited for it to stop. The voices got worse too, not just the woman anymore. Sometimes it was my dad calling from outside like he'd driven all the way from Ohio to check on me. Sometimes it was my brother Mike saying he was hurt and needed help. Once it was my high school girlfriend Sarah crying and begging me to let her in. That one almost got me. I had my hand on the deadbolts before I remembered Harold's warning. They know how to sound real. I learned to count during those times, count my heartbeats, count the seconds, count anything that kept my mind busy while whatever was out there tried to trick me into opening that door. The voices always got stronger when the moon disappeared. New moon nights were the worst. They'd start just after sunset and go until dawn, sometimes 3 or 4 different people I knew, taking turns calling my name. The man in the red coat came back twice more, same routine, somehow inside despite the locked door, standing by the stairs with that wooden pipe, tapping it against his palm. Tap, tap, tap. Never said a word. Just watched me while I pretended to read Harold's manuals and tried not to shake. Second time, he stood there for what felt like hours. I could smell tobacco smoke drifting up from downstairs, sweet and old-fashioned, like the kind my grandfather used to smoke. But I kept my eyes on the page and waited him out. The footsteps upstairs came back 3 more times. Winter storms, every one of them. I got better at recognizing the sound, that careful pacing that turned into frantic running, then heavy stomping that shook dust from the ceiling. Each time I followed Harold's rule, grabbed my coat, ran outside, called the number on my phone when it worked, spent hours in freezing rain and snow, watching my breath fog while something raged around upstairs like it was looking for me. Third time was the worst. February storm that brought hail the size of golf balls. I crouched against the lighthouse wall for 4 hours while whatever was up there tried to stomp its way through the floor. My lips turned blue and I couldn't feel my hands, but I stayed put. When Harold found me at sunrise, I was barely conscious. He had to help me inside and wrap me in blankets while I shivered for an hour, but he just nodded when I told him what happened, like it was exactly what he expected. That's when I understood something. The rules weren't just keeping me alive, they were keeping those things away from everyone else. The lighthouse was some kind of boundary, and as long as someone was here following the rules, whatever lived in the dark stayed put. I started recognizing patterns after a while. The knocking always came when ships were fighting the worst weather. The voices got stronger when vessels passed close to the rocks. The footsteps upstairs happened when big cargo ships or fishing boats came nearest to the dangerous water below. Like whatever was out there got excited when people were in trouble. Harold never said much during our morning handoffs, but I could see him checking me over each day, looking for signs I was cracking, I guess, making sure I hadn't broken any rules during the night. I never did, not once in 6 months. When my contract ended on a gray March morning, Harold arrived at 6:43 like always, unlocked the deadbolts, shook the rain off his jacket, took the logbook from my hands. He read through my final entries, nodded, and poured coffee from his thermos. "You did good," he said, offering me the cup. "Most people don't make it past the first month." I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic and felt the heat sink into my bones. 6 months of cold nights and things that shouldn't exist. "How many have you lost?" I asked. 3 quit in the first week. 2 more lasted about a month before they stopped showing up. Harold's gray eyes looked tired. One guy made it 4 months before he decided the rules were nonsense. "What happened to him?" "Found his truck in the parking lot next morning. Keys still in the ignition, door wide open." Harold took a sip of coffee. "Never found him." We sat there for a few minutes, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below. Morning light was getting stronger, pushing back the shadows that had hidden God knows what for the past 6 months. "I could use someone permanent," Harold said finally. "Someone who knows how to follow instructions." Pay's not great, but you'd have job security. I thought about it, really thought about it. 6 months of supernatural tests, and I'd passed everyone. I knew the patterns now, knew what to expect. The work itself wasn't hard, just the things that came with the dark. But I also knew what those 6 months had cost me. I'd lost 15 pounds from stress and missed meals, had nightmares on my days off about knocking doors and voices calling my name, jumped every time someone walked up behind me in town. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I think it's time for me to move on. Harold nodded like he'd expected that answer. Can't say I blame you. This place gets into your head after a while. He was right about that. Even now, sitting in the morning light with coffee warming my hands, I could feel the lighthouse watching me, like it knew I was leaving and wasn't happy about it. I finished the coffee and handed Harold the cup, grabbed my jacket from the hook by the stairs and headed for the door. Marcus. I turned back. Harold was standing by the radio, logbook in his hands. You ever tell anyone about what happens here? They'll think you're crazy. I know. Good. He opened the logbook to start his day shift notes. Drive safe. I unlocked the 3 deadbolts and stepped outside. My truck was covered in salt spray and bird droppings, but it started on the first try. I backed out of the gravel parking lot and headed down the coastal highway, watching the lighthouse shrink in my rearview mirror. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me leave, something that had been testing me for 6 months, seeing if I was strong enough to stay. I'd passed the tests, followed every rule, survived things that would have killed or driven off most people, and now I was driving away, knowing I'd never be able to explain to anyone what I'd really been doing out there. How I'd spent half a year standing guard between the normal world and something far more dangerous. The lighthouse disappeared behind the trees, but I could still feel it pulling at me. Like it knew I understood its secrets now, like it wanted me to come back. I kept driving and didn't look in the mirror again. I sat there at the bottom of the lighthouse road, engine running but not moving yet. My hands wouldn't stop shaking on the steering wheel. Just little tremors, but enough that I noticed. The lighthouse looked different in the morning sun, white and clean against the gray sky, like something you'd see on a postcard. Normal, historic, the kind of place families would drive out to visit on weekends, take pictures, maybe buy a souvenir from the gift shop if there was one. But I knew better now. Harold's truck was already parked by the entrance. I could make out his figure moving around the base of the building, probably doing his morning check, looking for scratches on the door, checking the ground for footprints that shouldn't be there, making sure whatever had been testing the boundaries during the night hadn't left any calling cards behind. I put the car in drive and pulled onto the main road toward town. The coastal highway curved through patches of pine and fir, and I found myself checking the mirrors more than I needed to. Not because I thought anything was following me. Just habit, I guess. About 2 miles down the road, I passed the small cemetery I'd never paid much attention to before. Old weathered headstones, some so worn you couldn't read the names anymore. A few newer ones, too. I slowed down without really meaning to, and caught sight of dates on some of the markers. 1892, 1906, 1923. Previous lighthouse keepers probably, the ones who hadn't been as lucky as me, the ones who'd ignored the rules. I pressed the gas pedal a little harder and kept driving. In the rearview mirror, the lighthouse got smaller and smaller until the coastal hills swallowed it up completely. But I could still feel it back there, like it was watching me leave, like it knew I understood things now that most people never would. 6 months. That's how long I'd lasted. 6 months of following 5 simple rules that had kept me breathing through nights that should have killed me. Harold had been right about everything. The knocking, the voices, the man in the red coat, the footsteps upstairs. All of it real, all of it dangerous, and all of it held back by rules that sounded crazy until you needed them. I thought about Harold, probably settling into his chair by the radio right about now, pouring coffee from that thermos, getting ready for another day of maintaining the light and keeping watch. 37 years he'd been doing this job. 37 years of knowing what came out after dark. Some jobs require more than just showing up and doing the work. Some jobs demand that you believe in warnings that sound impossible, that you follow instructions even when they don't make sense, that you trust the person who trained you, even when everything in your head is telling you the rules are just superstition. I was alive because I'd learned that lesson. Alive because Harold Brennan had written down 5 rules on a piece of paper and made sure I understood that my life depended on following them exactly. The highway stretched ahead of me, leading back to the normal world. Back to jobs where the biggest danger was maybe falling off a ladder or getting a paper cut. Back to a life where the worst thing that might happen at night was losing power during a storm. I was grateful for that. Grateful to Harold. Grateful for those rules, and grateful that I'd never have to test them again.